You're very welcome, everybody, to this first session of Teaching Toolkit Thursdays in the academic year 2024. Our first session is going to be about active and collaborative learning. So what we are going to do within this Teaching Toolkit is we are just going to give you a short presentation, about 15 minutes or so, and then we are going to open up for a kind of a group share. So if there are any questions, if there are any issues arising, or more importantly, if you would like to share some of your own examples and own practice, that will be very welcome. So let us begin the presentation. So what we are going to cover in this short session on active and collaborative learning is have a look at the couple of different definitions of active learning, what it actually means for individuals. We're going to look at different strategies about how one might actually implement active learning. And then we're going to try and look at some practical components therein about how it is we will actually introduce this within our own teaching practice. So let us begin with the very simple question, what is active learning? Now, if we go to the literature, I can tell you right now, there are at least, I think, 115 articles. So I run a module that involves active learning, and I have no end of citations for different kind of definitions. But I've taken two here for this session this morning. And the first one is a nice kind of general one that focuses on an actual kind of lecture. And the purpose here being that active learning is generally defined as any instructional method that engages students in the learning process. But what you can see from the little kind of shot on the right here of the actual typical kind of class period is there are different ways that this might unfold. So you've got an initial kind of lecture, you've got some moment for case study discussions, you've got a think, pair, share, you've got the idea of a 1-minute paper. So the lecture, traditional lecture as we know it, isn't now a 50-minute dialogue. It's often kind of interspersed with different moments of activity and engagement. And invariably, those activities are collaborative in nature. They might be individual, kind of reflective pieces, or kind of more wider group discussion elements. But all of this is about making sure that there are focused activities that engage the learner in the core content of a lecture. Another definition is a bit broader in terms, but basically active learning is one which engages students in the process of learning through a variety of different kind of methodologies and such. But also, in so doing, this kind of applied momentum in terms of the activities enables the learners to often get into a higher order thinking. And one of the things that does actually come up from the literature is the impact of active learning on student learning. So yes, it is kind of has impact in terms of a social perspective, in terms of the actual engagement, a psychological impact in terms of kind of well-being, but it also has a very direct impact on the assessment piece. So the article and the little kind of graphic to the left of the screen here is about the impact of active learning and how students kind of do in their subsequent assessments. And as you can see here, there's a kind of slight increase. And any increase is a good element. It doesn't have to be kind of particularly large as such, but there is a kind of impact on students' ability to understand what is required of them from their assessment protocol. So how might we actually put active learning in place? So what I have is a number of kind of moments here or pieces to kind of reflect upon. And one of the first things is actually making sure that we are engaging our learners in a meaningful way. And often this is sometimes enabling students not only to apply something, but there's actually a creative element. There's an opportunity for students to engage in something beyond what they kind of initially thought. So it's not just that kind of individual kind of 1-minute paper. There's authentic kind of case studies to interpret and to kind of work with. There are ways of actually building skill sets. So we're not kind of just doing a discussion, we're actually kind of building to a debate. Or we're not just doing an essay, we're actually kind of preparing for a report or an executive summary, an abstract. And so there's a whole array of skills, transversal skills that suddenly become apparent within these activities. So it's not just about the knowledge base, it's about the application of those and actually kind of involving students in a cognitive way as well as a kind of an active and participative way. And in that manner, it actually kind of drives the ability for students to actually get hands-on experience with problems, with kind of conceptual kind of issues that may otherwise not be done in a traditional lecture. So it starts to kind of build the process of engagement with the content and the materials. Another way of thinking about this is to actually focus from a student-centered perspective. And this kind of graphic nicely kind of shows us different kind of modalities about how it is one as an individual runs through kind of a student-centered learning arena. And this is kind of looking at how students engage with content. So the idea about self-determination, what it is I need to learn and how I would like to do that. So that kind of reflective piece whereby I think as an individual learner, this is the best, most effective way for me. So we can self-determine how we actively engage in the piece. The constructivism piece is about actually using our experience, our knowledge base, and actually kind of building new kind of interpretations. And sometimes that's done as a collective in a collaborative way. And so that opportunity to experience and share the experience with more than one individual within the kind of cohort is really empowering and powerful. And the final piece in that framework is the idea of constructionism. So the constructivism is kind of working together, but the constructionism is actually building new content, building new understandings, putting together new skill sets and realizing or making good on those. So the idea of having kind of information literacy, the idea of having kind of communication skills, design skills, if it comes to kind of creating posters or videos and such, all of these things are enabled by the idea of active learning. And in that way, what we often can actually kind of leverage is actually kind of go beyond the simple surface learning to a much more kind of deep engagement with the content, the material, and in this instance, one another as well. So we're always focusing on going beyond the peer cohort and kind of building that. So when, where, and what is it that I can actually do? So I've used the idea here about adaptive implementation. And what I mean by this is to think about our own individual kind of practice. So sometimes we can actually put in a little piece of active learning. And you can see from this graphic, there's a nice idea of kind of the simple to the more complex. And it's really important to actually, from an individual perspective, an individual practitioner, to try these things, not to be afraid not to do it. So what I mean by that is simply, have a go at something. If it's a kind of a poll everywhere quiz, if it is a pause for reflection, to have a little moment of quiet time within a lecture, if it's actually to do a big class brainstorm and allow people to raise their hand within a kind of cohort of 150 or 500 and let those people express themselves. So there's lots of different ways to do this. And I think the best thing is actually to have a go and see what works for you as an individual practitioner, but also be cognizant of what your learners are looking for and how they react to those things. So there's a huge array of different kind of opportunities to engage. And active learning isn't just about, always involving the group. It can be done individually. So you're asking individuals to actively reflect, to actually write something. The idea of that minute paper. So that's an active exercise, but it's really kind of empowering for the individual to kind of compose, a response to something or in preparation for another task that might build. And invariably, active learning tasks are things that actually build, not necessarily within a given lecture, but perhaps over a series of lectures and seminars and so forth and so on. So there is lots of different opportunities that one might try. But what we need to think about in doing this is actually think specifically about the actual session that we give and how that might be designed. So when we start off with a session, we often talk about its objectives. What exactly will you, as a learner, as a participant, be able to do at the end of this said session? And the idea being is that if we actually say, today we will discuss the different modalities of active learning, then there is a discussion, an active discussion that will do that. So this has a lovely kind of, impact in terms of actually enabling learners to know that there will be an element of discussion, there will be an element of analysis, there will be an element of description, of knowledge, or whatever it is that we use in terms of those objectives. And so what happens is by using the objectives and active verbs to describe those, we are enabling an actual action and activity to happen as a consequence. And the only thing that we have to kind of think about then is how we will actually kind of make that happen in the actual session itself. Is it to be done individually, collaboratively, cooperatively, and so forth and so on? So the design of the session is actually kind of the engine, so to speak, in enabling active learning to happen. So in terms of that very session, what is it that we could do? So what I've done here is simply given you 3 different kinds of parts of a session, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And within each of those, there are an array, and I've only given you a little sample. There are an array of different methods or indeed strategies that one might use to actively engage our learners. So if we start at the beginning here, the very simple one and obvious one is an icebreaker. To have a little kind of tete-a-tete with your peer about, what the session will undertake, to discuss the objectives of said session. Very easily done. The next one, I'm just going to run through a couple on each. The next one, the idea of a micro lecture. So if we think about a traditional lecture as a series of micro lectures, i.e. little kind of information transfers and then an activity to follow it, then there's a nice kind of structure, an ebb and flow. And what I mean by that is that I will give a little bit of information. Let's do an activity. Let's think about this. Let's kind of react to this. Let's prep for the next kind of bit of information. So that's a nice way of kind of working through it. I'm just going to jump into the middle of this and pick another one by way of example. Oh yes, word clouds. Let's say a word cloud. So word cloud is a lovely way. We can do this electronically by using Poll Everywhere or any of the kind of peer response pieces like Socrative or Mentimeter. And you ask people to actually kind of respond to a particular question or to an idea or a concept. And there's a word cloud that will form on screen. And this gives us a kind of a trigger or could act as a trigger within the cohort to kind of follow up on something, to get a kind of a norm reference about one's understanding of a particular concept. And again, a really simple but a powerful thing. Powerful because in this instance, it can be referred to after the session. In this instance, because it's an online version, it hopefully means that the students can access it after the session as well. Or indeed, you may actually do it as a preemptive task. And that's another thing to consider in terms of the design of our sessions. Active learning doesn't have to be, facilitated by ourselves. It could be a kind of preemptive thing that one does before coming to session, a la do a reading or follow up on a particular reading, or it could be something that one would do after the session, compose a little kind of report and so forth. So let's look at the middle point of a particular session. So in this instance, let's say, oh, I beg your pardon. In this instance, let's say I'll look at an action plan. So we've kind of done a little bit of the session. We've got an introduction. We've got a kind of a micro lecture. We've actually kind of done a little kind of word cloud. And now I'm asking the students to actually create an action plan about what it is, how it is they will prepare for a quiz, a summative quiz that might be happening in week 6, to prepare for an essay that might be happening. And they can do this kind of collaboratively together with one another. We might use a set of Google Slides. And again, that means there's an online version of this that one can access and the students can reference after the fact. And what we're trying to do here in terms of choosing these activities is to use something that is both impactful on the actual given lecture, but also hopefully impactful on the students in terms of this idea of transversal skills development, but also in terms of engagement. So we're using different methodologies to engage our learners in different modalities, remembering that every individual is going to have something that they will be more comfortable with, something that they would prefer to do. So this is really important to give a kind of a perspective of choice in this. The final piece in terms of kind of session ends and what that might look like, just start with the first one there, the idea of reflective writing, to actually get students to reflect upon the session, what it is has happened. And this might actually kind of, materialize as a muddiest point. You ask students to say, well, actually, after this session, what do you still not understand in great detail? What is it that you would like for me as a facilitator, as a lecturer, to explain more in the next session, or to explain more after this session when we move online? And so that, again, is a really powerful tool to enable students to think about what is done, what it is they have learned, what it is they still need to learn. And thus, we're giving a little bit of kind of assessment as learning here, where they can actually interact with materials that they're doing right there and then. So you can choose a multitude of things to do. Find something that you are comfortable with. Find something that is important to the content and context within which you teach, and also that you feel the students will actually respond to. So let us give a little final wrap. So what I would suggest we do is to integrate learning activities that you are comfortable with. So the big thing here is to find out what it is you want to do. And I would say that you should actually be a little bit brave and just try these things. And this is often kind of the best way. In one respect, you can never truly fail because you're actually kind of, getting a response. The students will be engaged anyhow in terms of actually doing something. And that's kind of powerful in and of itself. But I suppose what you and I need to do in terms of our own practice is to kind of reflect and be responsive to how the students engage. And most often, it's this idea of a kind of a small thing to actually engage the students. Even it could be like a moment of silence to reflect. It could be a show of hands. It doesn't have to be technological. It could be turn to your peer and ask a question. Once you've got that question, write down the answer. Share it with the people behind you. What are the similarities? What are the issues missing? These are the things that work most effectively in that respect. And then the most important thing to think about when doing active learning and putting those pieces in place is to make sure that the learners are doing this in a way that means they're actively engaging with the materials. So this is the readings, the lecture information itself, and maybe kind of, complementary materials after the fact, i.e. a lab or a practical seminar that happens. So all of these things are intertwined. Make sure that they have opportunity to engage with one another. Sharing the load in terms of large groups is a wonderful thing to be able to do. So it's not only about me as an individual kind of being engaged, but engaging with my peers, engaging with the bigger set. So often that idea of sharing with the person beside you and sharing what you two have talked about with people behind you and in front of you, and wrapping that and making that a bigger kind of piece is a really good way of getting communication development within our class. And the last piece is simply to make sure that the opportunities that we provide are getting students engaged with us as a facilitator. Because what this does for you and I is it gives us immediate feedback. We can see that our students are engaged, literally, by looking at them and hearing what they're doing or seeing what they're outputting in terms of posters or online kind of responses. And this is really important for you and I to actually gauge, A, whether the activity has been effective, but B, and perhaps most importantly, is the activity doing what we expect it to do? What we expect it to do in respect of those objectives, i.e. discuss X, design Y, but also the fact that the students are actually engaging in a meaningful way, that it's authentic to our content, to our lecture, and what it means to do. So that engagement with us is really important because it's engaging with the design that we have put in place and enables us to recognize that it's working and it's working well. So that is that. Are there any questions arising? Our next session is going to be on reflective practice, but for now, what we are going to do is just kind of close the slides and see if there are any particular questions that you have.